The sound of that slap cut through the marble lounge like a gunshot. Victoria Hale's diamond ring split the skin of Jack Carter's cheek, and 40 of the most powerful people in the American defense industry went dead silent. A billionaire CEO had just struck a man in worn work boots in front of everyone. His little girl screamed and buried her face in his leg. But Jack Carter didn't flinch. He didn't raise a hand. He simply turned his bleeding face back toward her and asked in a voice colder than the champagne on ice, "Are you finished?" What Victoria couldn't see was the old combat scar beneath his jaw. But her own bodyguard saw it, and his face went white as death. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across this great country of ours. And if you believe a man's worth isn't measured by his clothes, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because you are not going to want to miss how this one ends. Now let's begin. The Meridian Club sat on the top 4 floors of a glass tower in the heart of the city, and men did not walk into that lounge by accident. They were vetted. They were invited. They arrived in cars that cost more than most Americans made in 3 years, and they came to shake the hands that decided which companies would build the next generation of this nation's weapons. Jack Carter had not been invited. He was there because the building's climate system had failed on the executive floor at 4 o'clock that afternoon, and the club's manager had called every HVAC contractor in the phone book until one of them, a small outfit run out of a garage across the river, had agreed to send someone that same day. That someone was Jack. And because his daughter's after-school program had closed early, and because a single father with a job that pays the rent does not turn down a same-day call, 7-year-old Lily Carter had come along with her coloring books, and her stuffed rabbit, and a promise from her daddy that when he was done, they would go get hot chocolate at the park. "Just an hour, sweetheart," he'd told her in the service elevator. "You sit tight, you color your pictures, and Daddy fixes the cold air. Then it's you and me and marshmallows. Deal." "Deal," Lily had said, and she'd hooked her pinky around his. He'd fixed the unit in 50 minutes. A seized condenser fan and a blown capacitor, nothing exotic. He'd wiped down his tools, coiled his hoses, and walked back through the club to reach the service exit. One big scarred hand resting on his daughter's shoulder, steering her gently through a crowd that had begun to fill the lounge for the evening. He should have taken the back hall. He knew that later. But the manager had waved him through the main floor because the service corridor was blocked by catering carts, and Jack, being a man who did what he was told and caused no trouble, went the way he was pointed. That was the whole crime. He walked where he was told to walk. Victoria Hale was 39 years old, and she had built Hale Dynamics from a single subcontract into a company on the verge of a $14 billion contract with the United States government. She wore a suit that cost more than Jack's truck, and she moved through that room the way a blade moves through water. People parted for her without being asked. She was mid-sentence telling a retired admiral something about supply chain resilience, gesturing with a flute of champagne, when Jack and Lily crossed in front of her. Lily, 7 years old and unsteady in the crowd, stumbled. Her small shoulder brushed Victoria's arm. Champagne sloshed maybe a drop, maybe two, onto the sleeve of the $4,000 jacket, and Victoria Hale came apart. "Are you out of your mind?" Her voice cracked across the lounge, loud enough that heads turned from 30 feet away. "Do you have any idea what this costs? Do you?" She looked down at Jack, at his boots, at his gray work shirt with the little embroidered name patch, at his daughter's cheap coat, and something in her face curdled into pure contempt. "Oh, of course, of course. They let the help wander around loose now. Where is your handler who let a janitor onto this floor?" "I'm not a janitor, ma'am," Jack said quietly. "I fixed your air conditioning. We're just heading out. I apologize for my daughter." "Your daughter." She said the word like it disgusted her. "You brought a child to a private executive club. Do you have any concept of where you are? Do you know who is in this room?" "No, ma'am. And it's not my business. We're leaving right now." He tried to move. He put his hand on Lily's shoulder and started to steer her toward the exit, and that the fact that he tried to simply walk away was what broke something in Victoria Hale that no amount of money had ever fixed. Because Victoria Hale was a woman who had spent her entire life fighting to be seen. And here was a nobody, a nothing. A man in work boots, trying to make her disappear by refusing to give her the fight she wanted. She stepped in front of him. "You don't walk away from me," she said. "Nobody walks away from me. You're going to stand there and you're going to apologize like you mean it. And then maybe I won't make one phone call that ends. Whatever sad little company put that name on your shirt." The room had gone quiet now. Really quiet. 100 people pretending to look at their phones while every one of them watched. "I already apologized," Jack said. "Twice. My little girl bumped your arm by accident. She's 7. I'll pay for the cleaning. Now if you'll excuse us." "Excuse you." Victoria laughed, and it was an ugly sound. "You think you're in a position to be excused? Look at you. Look at your shoes. Men like you spend your whole lives cleaning up after men like the ones in this room, and you have the nerve to talk down to me. I'm not talking down to you, ma'am. I'm asking you to let me take my daughter home." And maybe it was the calm in his voice. Maybe it was that he wouldn't cower, wouldn't grovel, wouldn't give her the satisfaction of watching a poor man break. Maybe Victoria Hale had simply never in her adult life been told no by someone she considered beneath her, and her body didn't know what to do with the feeling. Whatever it was, she hit him. She swung her open hand and she struck him full across the face, and the diamond on her finger opened a thin red line, high on his cheekbone, and the crack of it went through that marble room like a rifle shot. Lily screamed. A short, high, terrified sound. She grabbed her father's leg with both arms and pressed her face into his thigh and started to sob, and Jack Carter, 6'2", 210 pounds, of a man who had carried wounded soldiers across open ground under fire, did not move. He did not raise his hand. He did not raise his voice. He reached down, slow and steady, and he put one arm around his daughter and he pulled her in against him so she couldn't see. Blood ran down to his jaw and dripped once onto the marble floor. Then he looked at Victoria Hale and he said the 4 words that would be replayed on 10 million phones by the end of the week. "Are you finished?" The room did not breathe. Victoria stood there with her hand still stinging her chest, heaving. And for 1/2 of 1 second, something flickered across her face that might have been the beginning of understanding what she had just done. Then it was gone. Buried under 39 years of never once admitting a mistake. "I am nowhere near finished," she said. "Marcus." She snapped her fingers without turning around. "Marcus, get this man and his child out of my sight, and call building security. I want him charged with assault. He shoved me, everyone here saw it. He shoved me and spilled my drink and threatened me." Nobody had seen any such thing, but nobody said so either. Because the men in that room were about to do business with Victoria Hale, and the truth is a cheap thing to trade away when there are billions on the table. Marcus stepped forward. Marcus Bell was 51 years old, 6'4", built like a bank vault, and he had been Victoria Hale's chief of personal security for 6 years. Before that, he'd spent 22 years in the United States Army. He was a professional. When his principal said, "Remove him," he removed him. He'd done it 100 times, reporters, protesters, drunk executives, a stalker once. He crossed the marble floor with his hands coming up and his eyes locked on the man in the work boots, already calculating the grip, the angle, the walk to the elevator. And then Marcus Bell got close, and he saw the scar. It ran along the underside of Jack's jaw, from just below the ear to the point of the chin. An old wound healed pale and rough, the kind of scar you don't get from a kitchen accident or a bar fight. Marcus stopped walking. His eyes went from the scar to Jack's face, and then Jack had rolled his sleeves for the work, and the cuff had ridden up on his forearm to a faded tattoo on the inside of his wrist. A small one, a skull with a dagger through it, and 3 words beneath it, in a language most Americans have never seen. Marcus Bell had seen it exactly once before in his life. His hands, which had been coming up to grab a man's collar, stopped in the air. The color drained out of his face like someone had pulled a plug. He took a half step back. His mouth opened, and nothing came out. "Marcus!" Victoria's voice sharpened. "What are you doing? I said remove him." Marcus didn't move, because Marcus was not standing in the Meridian Club anymore. Marcus was 19 years younger and 8,000 miles away in a valley with no name, pinned down with what was left of his platoon, watching men he'd trained with die in the dark. Radio dead. Air support 40 minutes out. And then, out of the black, a voice on a scavenged frequency. Calm as Sunday morning. Hold your position. I'm coming to you. One man had come down into that valley on foot alone and pulled 11 soldiers out of a kill zone that the after-action report would later call unsurvivable. Marcus had been carried out over that man's shoulder with 2 rounds in his leg. He had never seen his face in daylight. But he had seen the scar lit by a flare, and he had heard the name whispered up and down the line for years afterward, like a legend that couldn't possibly be real. Carter. Marcus! Victoria was almost shouting now. Are you deaf? Do your job? Marcus Bell turned to face his employer. And when he spoke, his voice had lost all of its granite. It had gone soft, almost pleading. Ma'am? He swallowed. Ma'am, don't do this. Victoria stared at him like he'd started speaking a foreign language. What did you just say to me? Please. Marcus lowered his hands the rest of the way until they hung at his sides. Whatever this is, whatever you think this is, you need to stop, right now. You work for me. Yes, ma'am, I do. Marcus's eyes flicked back to Jack, and there was something in them Victoria had never seen on his face in 6 years. Not fear exactly, but something close to it mixed with something like awe. But I know who that man is, and you don't. And I am telling you, as the last favor I will ever do for you, that you need to walk away before this gets any worse than it already is. For a long moment, Victoria Hale looked at her bodyguard as though the floor had tilted beneath her. Then her jaw set, and her eyes went flat and hard, and she made the decision that would take everything she had ever built and burn it to the ground. You're fired, she told Marcus. Get your things and get out. I'll handle this myself. She pulled her phone from her jacket. Her fingers were shaking with rage, she told herself only with rage. She scrolled to a number that almost no one in America had a private line of favor she had cashed in more than once. The direct number of a deputy undersecretary at the Pentagon. A man whose office would in 11 days sign off on a $14 billion contract that would make Hale Dynamics the crown jewel of the American defense sector. She put the phone to her ear and turned her back on Jack Carter and his weeping daughter, so certain of what came next that she was already smiling. It's Victoria, she said when the line picked up. I'm sorry to call the private line, but I've got a situation and I need it handled tonight. There's a maintenance worker at the Meridian Club, some contractor works on air conditioners, and he put his hands on me. In front of half the industry. I want him arrested, and I want that little garage company he works for shut down by Monday. His name's on his shirt hold, on... She glanced back. Carter. J. Carter. Through the phone, the room heard nothing. But Jack Carter heard something because Jack was watching Victoria's face, and he watched it change. The deputy undersecretary had gone quiet. Then the man's voice came through the phone, not loud, but clear enough in that silent room that the people closest to Victoria could just make out the words. And the first thing he said was, "Not of course," and it was not, "I'll handle it." The first thing he said was, "Victoria, stop talking. Does he have a scar along his jaw, left side?" Victoria's smile flickered. What? I don't? Yes. Yes, he has some kind of scar. What does that have to do with... Is his first name Jack? She turned around fully now. She looked at the man in the work boots holding his sobbing daughter, and for the first time all evening, a thin thread of something cold began to work its way into her chest. I don't know his first. She stopped, read the patch again. It says J. I assume... Put him on the phone. Excuse me? Victoria. The voice on the other end was no longer the voice of a man doing a favor for a valued contractor. It was the voice of a man who had just realized his contractor had done something unforgivable and who was now moving very fast to get on the right side of it. I am not going to ask you again. Put Jack Carter on the phone, right now. Every eye in the Meridian Club was on Victoria Hale as she lowered the phone from her ear, her face the color of the marble under her feet, and held it out across the space between them toward the man she had just slapped. Jack looked at the phone. He didn't reach for it right away. He finished what he was doing. First, he crouched down to his daughter's level, wiped a tear off her cheek with his thumb, and murmured something to her that no one else could hear. Lily nodded and grabbed a fistful of his shirt and got quiet. Only then did Jack Carter straighten up and take the phone from Victoria Hale's trembling hand and put it to his ear. "This is Carter," he said, and the whole room, 100 of the most important people in the American defense industry, watched a billionaire's face crumble as a 3-star general's voice loud now, because the man had raised it in something that sounded almost like joy, came pouring out of that phone. Jack Carter, my God, it's been son. Do you have any idea how long I've been trying to find you? Where the hell have you been?" Jack closed his eyes for just a second. When he opened them, they were tired. "Around, sir," he said. "Just trying to raise my girl." "Your girl. You've got a—" The general laughed, and it broke a little at the end. "Jack, listen to me. Whatever is going on there tonight, I need you to know something, and I need everyone in that room to hear you say it back to me, so there's no confusion. Are you listening?" "Yes, sir. There are 11 men alive today because of what you did in that valley. 11 families. I've got their Christmas cards on my wall. One of them named his son after you. You understand me? You don't owe this world one more thing. Not one. So you tell me what's happening right now, and you tell me true." And Jack Carter, standing there with blood drying on his cheek and his daughter's fist twisted in his shirt, and 100 of the most powerful people in America hanging on his every word, looked directly at Victoria Hale. "There's a lady here," he said quietly. "A CEO. She spilled her drink, and she got upset, and she hit me in front of my little girl." The silence in the Meridian Club was total. Somewhere near the back of the room a phone was recording. Then another. Then a dozen, and Victoria Hale, billionaire industry titan, mistress of a $14 billion empire, stood frozen in the center of it all as she finally began to understand exactly whom she had chosen to strike. Marcus Bell, halfway to the door with his coat over his arm, stopped. He turned around. He reached up and he pulled the security earpiece out of his ear, and he looked at it in his palm for a moment. Then he looked at Jack Carter and Marcus Bell. 22 years, Army 6 years. The most loyal man in Victoria Hale's employ said, just loud enough for the room to hear, "I quit." He set the earpiece down on the marble bar, and he walked out. The general's voice was still coming through the phone, warm and urgent, but Jack Carter had already lowered it slightly from his ear, because he could feel his daughter shaking against his leg. And in that moment, the man who had walked into unsurvivable valleys cared about exactly one thing in the world, and it was not the $14 billion empire dissolving in front of him. "Sir," Jack said into the phone, "can you give me 1 minute? My little girl's scared." "Take all the time you need, son," the general said. "I'll be right here." Jack crouched. He did it the way he did everything, without hurry, and he took Lily's small face in his 2 rough hands, and he wiped the tears with his thumbs, and he said, Hey, look at me. You remember what we say about scary things?" Lily hiccuped. "That they get smaller when you look right at them." "That's right. And is anything in this room going to hurt you?" No, because I'm right here, and I am not going anywhere." He tucked a piece of her hair behind her ear. "You did nothing wrong tonight, baby. Nothing. You hear me? A grown-up got angry, and that is a grown-up problem, and it is not yours to carry." Okay, Daddy. That's my girl. Now you hold Mr. Rabbit and you stand right here next to me, and in a few minutes we're gonna go get that hot chocolate, marshmallows and everything. Deal. And she hooked her pinky around his, and Jack Carter stood back up, and something about that small, ordinary gesture in the middle of all that marble and money made 3 separate people in that room start to cry, because they had all just watched Victoria Hale scream at this man, insult his work, insult his child, and strike him hard enough to draw blood. And through every second of it, He had not raised his voice once. And now they were watching him kneel on that cold floor and gentle his frightened daughter, like the whole rest of the world could wait. And the contrast was so total, so complete, that it rearranged something in the chest of everyone who saw it. Victoria Hale saw it too, and she hated it, because it was making her look like exactly what she had just been, and Victoria Hale had spent her entire life making sure no one ever got to see what she was underneath. She reached out. "That's enough. Give me back my phone." Jack didn't hand it back. He raised it to his ear instead. "I'm here, sir." "Good," the general said. "Now I want you to listen to me carefully, because I need to understand the situation on the ground, and then I am going to fix it. This woman who called me, Victoria Hale." "Yes, sir." "She struck you." "Yes, sir." "In front of your daughter." "Yes, sir." There was a silence on the line that had weight to it. When the general spoke again, his voice had changed and the warmth was still there, but underneath it now was something that had put entire operations into motion with fewer words. "Is she still in the room, Jack?" "She's standing right in front of me." "Put me on speaker." Jack looked at Victoria. "He wants you to hear this." Victoria's chin came up. 6 years of dominating every room she had ever walked into does not evaporate in 90 seconds, and she reached for the last thing she had left, which was pride. "I don't take orders from a ma'am," Jack said quietly. "I'd take the call." There was something in the way he said it. Not a threat. Jack Carter did not make threats. It was worse than a threat. It was the calm of a man who had already survived the worst thing that could happen to him and had come out the other side with nothing left to prove, and it silenced her more completely than any amount of yelling could have. She went still. Jack pressed the speaker button, and the general's voice filled the Meridian Club. "Ms. Hale, can you hear me?" "Yes." Her voice had lost some of its edge. "Who is this?" "My name is Lieutenant General Raymond Ellison. I am the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, and 11 days from now, my signature is one of 3 that finalizes the LGM contract award to Hale Dynamics. You called my private line 4 minutes ago to ask me to have a man arrested. Do you know who that man is?" The room held its breath. "He's a maintenance contractor," Victoria said, but there was no conviction left in it. He put his hands. "Stop." Just the one word, and it cracked across that lounge like the slap had. "Do not finish that sentence, because I have known Jack Carter for 19 years, and I know exactly the kind of man he is. And if you tell me one more time that he laid a hand on you, I am going to know for a fact that you are a liar, and I am going to conduct the rest of this evening's business accordingly. So I will ask you one time, and you will tell me the truth. Did he touch you, or did you touch him?" Victoria's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And into that silence from the back of the room, a voice spoke up that no one expected. It was the retired admiral she'd been charming 90 seconds before the whole thing started. An old man, silver-haired, 78 years old, who had been standing close enough to see all of it. "General Ellison, this is Admiral Tom Reyes, retired. I was standing 6 feet away." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. She struck him, open hand, hard enough to cut his face on her ring. He never lifted a finger. His little girl was holding his leg the whole time. You could have heard a pin drop on that marble. "Thank you, Admiral," the general said. "It's an honor to have you on the line, sir." And then colder. "Ms. Hale, I want you to understand precisely where you are standing right now. You struck a decorated combat veteran in front of a room full of witnesses. You attempted to use my office to have him falsely arrested. You threatened a small business that a man supports his child with. And you did all of it while holding a contract that requires, as a matter of federal law, that the awarded party demonstrate sound moral character and judgment. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You can't." Victoria's voice finally broke. "That contract is worth $14 billion. There are 9,000 jobs. You cannot just over one." "Over one what?" Ms. Hale, finish it. "Over one nobody. Over one poor man in work boots." Is that the sentence you want on the record with an admiral, and 40 industry executives listening. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. She had walked to the edge of the cliff on her own 2 feet, and she had only just now looked down. "Here is what is going to happen," the general said. "First, you are going to apologize to Jack Carter, not to me, to him. And you are going to mean it, or you are not going to bother, because that man can smell a lie from a mile off, and so can I. Second, you are not going to touch that little girl's father again, or her, or so much as look sideways at the company on his shirt, because if I hear that anything at all has happened to that business, I will personally make it my mission to understand why. Third, and you write this down. The award board convenes in 11 days. I will be recommending a full character and conduct review of Hale Dynamics leadership before that board. Do you know what triggers a review like that, Ms. Hale?" Victoria's hand had come up to cover her mouth. "Documented evidence of assault by a company officer," the general said, "which from the sound of that room exists on about 30 phones already. Good night, Ms. Hale. Jack, take me off speaker." Jack lifted the phone. Around him, the Meridian Club had come alive with a low, urgent hum, 40 of the most powerful people in America, suddenly all talking to each other in the hushed, rapid tones of people who have just watched a building collapse and are calculating how far the dust is going to spread and whether it will reach them. "Yes, sir," Jack said quietly. "Are you okay, son, truly?" "I'm all right. It's a scratch." "That's not what I asked. Is the little girl okay?" Jack looked down at Lily, who had recovered enough to be staring up at all the fancy grown-ups with open curiosity. Mr. Rabbit clutched to her chest. "She's gonna be fine. Kids are tougher than we give 'em credit for." Her mother... A pause. "It's just us, sir. Has been for a while." Ellison was quiet a moment. "You raised her alone." "I did. I do, Jack." The general's voice had gone rough. "You saved 11 of my men, and then you disappeared off the face of the earth, and I always wondered what became of you. And now I find out you've been out here fixing rich people's air conditioners so you could feed your little girl, and one of them slapped you for it. There is something wrong with this country when that's how we treat a man like you." "There's a lot of good people too, sir," Jack said. "I meet 'em every day. She's just not one of 'em." And somehow that more than anything else was the thing that undid Victoria Hale. Not the threat of losing the contract, not the general's fury. It was the quiet grace of the man she had struck refusing even now to condemn the whole world for her sins, and it landed on her like a physical blow, and she felt her legs go weak, and she reached out and put a hand on the back of a leather chair to keep from swaying. Because here is the thing about Victoria Hale that no one in that room knew that she had spent 20 years and a fortune making sure no one would ever know. She had grown up with nothing. Less than nothing. She had grown up in a trailer with a father who drank and a mother who left, and she had clawed her way out of it with her fingernails, and somewhere along the way she had made herself a promise that she would never ever be looked down on again. And she had kept that promise so ferociously for so long that she had become the exact thing she'd once been terrified of. She had become the person who looks down. And she had built a wall so high around the frightened trailer park girl she used to be that she'd forgotten the girl was even in there, until a man in work boots knelt on a marble floor and comforted his daughter the way no one had ever comforted her. "Give me back my phone," she said, but her voice had no power in it now. It was almost a whisper. Jack handed it to her. Their eyes met. And for one strange suspended second, the billionaire and the maintenance man looked at each other across a distance that was so much smaller than either of them would ever have guessed. And Jack Carter, who owed her exactly nothing, saw something in her face that surprised him. He saw the girl in the trailer. He didn't know that's what it was. But he saw the fear under the fury the way he'd once been able to see everything on a battlefield, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, and something in his expression softened just a fraction. "You should call somebody," he told her quietly. "A lawyer, maybe. This is gonna get worse before it gets better." It was almost kind. That was the thing that finished her. It was almost kind. Victoria Hale took her phone in a shaking hand and walked on unsteady heels toward the far corner of the lounge away from all the eyes, and she stood with her back to the room, and no one could see her face, and it was probably better that way. Behind her, the room was already moving on. That is the brutal arithmetic of a room like that. 90 seconds ago, Victoria Hale had been the most important person in it. The woman everyone wanted 5 minutes with, and now she was radioactive. And the same men who had been laughing at her jokes were already drifting to the other side of the room, already pulling out phones, already making the quiet calls that would begin within the hour to move billions of dollars of investment away from a name that had suddenly become a liability. She had not yet been arrested. She had not yet lost the contract. But every person in that room with a functioning survival instinct had already made the calculation, and the calculation was the same, and it was this. She is finished. Get clear. Jack Carter did not join the drift. He knelt back down to his daughter. You ready to blow this popsicle stand, sweetheart? Can we still get hot chocolate? We can absolutely still get hot chocolate. Even though it's dark now. Especially because it's dark now. Hot chocolate's better in the dark. Everybody knows that. Lily giggled, and it was the first easy sound she'd made in 15 minutes, and Jack gathered up his toolbox in one hand and took her small hand in the other and started for the service exit. And that would have been the end of it. That would have been the whole story. A good man walking his daughter out into the night to get her a warm drink after a bad hour, except that the room would not let him go. The old admiral got there first. Tom Reyes, 78, crossed the floor faster than a man his age should have been able to and put himself gently in Jack's path with his hand already extended. Sergeant Major Carter? Jack stopped. He looked at the offered hand for a second before he took it. It's just Jack, sir. I've been out a long time. You're never out. You know that. The old man gripped his hand hard. I served 31 years. I have met exactly 4 men in my life that I would call the real thing, the genuine article, and I am standing in front of the 5th. I heard what you did in that valley. Everybody in the community heard about it eventually, even the ones who weren't supposed to. And I want you to know that watching what you just did in this room, the way you handled that, the way you looked after your little one, that was every bit as much a thing of honor as anything you ever did over there. Maybe more, because over there you were trained for it. In here, you just had to be who you are. Jack didn't say anything for a moment. When men who don't cry find themselves close to it, they get very quiet, and Jack got very quiet. Thank you, sir, he finally managed. Do you have a card for your company? Jack almost laughed. I've got a magnet. For the fridge. Give me the magnet. Jack fished a business card magnet out of his shirt pocket. The cheap kind you order 500 of for $40. And the old admiral took it and held it up and turned to the room, and his voice, which had been so gentle, suddenly filled the whole space with the parade ground authority of a man who had commanded fleets. Gentlemen and ladies, I'd like everyone's attention for one moment. The room turned. My name is Admiral Tom Reyes. Some of you know me. For those who don't, I spent 31 years in the United States Navy, and I have never in my life asked a room full of business people for a favor. I'm going to ask for one now. He held up the little magnet. This is Jack Carter's company. He fixes heating and cooling systems. He is a single father, raising a little girl, and he is, I say this without any exaggeration whatsoever, one of the finest human beings any of us will ever be privileged to breathe the same air as. Most of you own buildings. All of you know people who own buildings. I would consider it a personal kindness if this man never had to worry about work again. That's all. That's my favor. Thank you. For a second, nobody moved. And then a man near the front, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit, walked over and took a photo of the magnet with his phone and said, I've got 400,000 square feet of commercial space across 3 states. Mr. Carter, and I've been unhappy with my current contractor for a year. Can I call you Monday? And then another one came, and another, and Jack Carter, who had walked into that lounge as a nobody and been slapped for the crime of existing, while poor stood in the middle of a room full of the most powerful people in American industry, as they lined up one after another, to press their business cards into his free hand and photograph the magnet on their phones, and he genuinely did not know what to do with his face. "I don't," he kept saying. "You don't have to. I'm just—" "Take the cards, Daddy," Lily whispered, tugging his sleeve. "That's a lot of hot chocolate." The whole room laughed. And even Jack laughed, and the sound of it broke the last of the terrible tension. And for a moment, the Meridian Club was not a place where a billionaire had struck a poor man, but a place where 100 people were watching something get made right, at least a little, at least for one man, and they were glad to be part of it. In the far corner, with her back still to the room, Victoria Hale heard the laughter, and it was the loneliest sound she had ever heard in her life. She had her phone to her ear. She had called her lawyer. She had called her head of communications. She had called her chief of staff. And one by one, in the space of 6 minutes, she had begun to understand the shape of what was happening to her, because her lawyer's voice had gone from confident to careful to frightened, and her communications chief had said the words, "There are already 3 videos up, and one of them has 40,000 views," in a tone Victoria had never heard her use, and her chief of staff had said very quietly, "Victoria, the board chair is trying to reach you. He's called twice. Tell him I'll call him back. Victoria, he knows. Somebody in that room already texted him. He knows everything." Victoria closed her eyes. 9 minutes. That is how long it took. She had spent 22 years building Hale Dynamics from a single subcontract into a $14 billion defense titan, 22 years of 18-hour days, and burned bridges, and sacrificed friendships, and it took 9 minutes from the moment her hand connected with Jack Carter's face to the moment her own board chair started dialing her number for all of it to begin coming apart at the seams. She turned around. She had to. She could not stand in that corner forever. And when she turned, the first thing she saw was Jack Carter over by the exit. Now a fistful of business cards in his hand, and his little girl's hand in the other, looking overwhelmed and humble, and God help her kind. And the second thing she saw was that not one single person in that entire room was looking at Victoria Hale anymore. She who had commanded every room she'd ever walked into. She had become invisible. She had become the help. The irony of it was so vast and so cruel that she almost laughed. She began to walk. She did not entirely know where she was going. Some part of her, the strategist, the survivor, the girl from the trailer who had never once in her life stopped fighting, was pulling her across that floor toward the only door out of this that she could see. And the door was Jack Carter. If she could reach him, if she could apologize, if she could somehow make him say in front of all these people and all those cameras that it was fine, that he forgave her, that it was a misunderstanding. If she could get the veteran to absolve her, then maybe. She crossed the room. People stepped out of her way now, not out of deference but out of distaste, the way you step away from something that might get on you. She reached him. "Mr. Carter." Jack turned. Lily instinctively stepped half behind his leg. Victoria looked down at the little girl, and for one moment the practiced apology died in her throat because the child was afraid of her. This 7-year-old was actually afraid of her, was hiding from her. And Victoria Hale had a sudden and total memory of being 7 years old herself, and hiding behind a couch from an adult whose moods could turn without warning, and the memory hit her so hard that she actually swayed. She started. And then something happened that no one in that room could have predicted, least of all Victoria. Lily Carter, 7 years old, peered out from behind her father's leg, looked up at the terrifying rich lady who had hurt her daddy, and said in the clear, guileless voice that only small children have, "You have sad eyes." The whole room went quiet again. Victoria Hale stared at the child. "You have sad eyes," Lily said again, as if the grown-up simply hadn't heard her the first time. "My daddy says people are mean when they're sad inside. Are you sad inside?" And Victoria Hale, billionaire titan of industry, the woman who had never once in her adult life let anyone see her cry, stood in the middle of the Meridian Club and felt her face crumple like wet paper, and she put her hand over her mouth, and the tears came, and she could not stop them, and there was nowhere to hide. Jack looked down at his daughter. Lily. Was that not nice? Lily asked, worried. I was trying to be nice. She looked sad. You were being nice, baby, Jack said quietly. You were being real nice. And he put his hand on the top of her head. Victoria wiped at her face, furious at herself, humiliated in a way that all the slaps in the world could not have accomplished, undone by a child's kindness. I'm sorry, she said, and it came out cracked and wrong and nothing like the polished apology she'd been assembling. I'm sorry. Mr. Carter, I am so what I did was there's no... She couldn't get a full sentence out. I don't know why I did it. That's not true. I do know. I don't know how to say it. I hit you, and your daughter, I'm so sorry. Jack looked at her for a long moment. And here the room leaned in, because everyone wanted to know what a man like that says to a woman like that in a moment like this. They wanted the speech. They wanted the veteran to lay her low with some perfect devastating line, or to lift her up with some perfect saintly forgiveness. They wanted a movie. But Jack Carter was not a movie. He was just a tired father who wanted to get his kid a hot chocolate. Ma'am, he said, I've had a long day, and my girl's had a long day, and we're gonna go now. He paused. I'm not gonna tell you it's okay because it's not, and we both know it's not, and if I said it was, I'd be lying to you and lying in front of my daughter, and I don't do that. He shifted the toolbox in his hand. But I'll tell you this for free because somebody ought to. Whatever's making you hurt bad enough to hit a stranger in front of his kid, that thing is not going to get better by hitting more strangers. Take it from a guy who's seen how that road ends. Get yourself some help, real help, before you lose whatever you've got left that's worth keeping. And that was it. That was the whole speech. No thunder, no absolution, just one broken person telling another the plain truth in the plainest words, and somehow it landed harder than any thunder could have. He turned to go. Mr. Carter? Her voice stopped him. When he looked back, she had straightened up and wiped her face, and something in her had steadied, as if his refusal to either destroy her or save her had given her a strange kind of ground to stand on. The company on your shirt. Whatever happens to me tonight, it will never be touched. I give you my word. Not that my word is worth much right now. Jack nodded once. Appreciate that. He walked out. His daughter's hand in his toolbox in the other, a fortune in new business. Stuffed in his shirt pocket, the old admiral's hand raised in a slow salute at his back, and 40 of the most powerful people in America parting before him like he was the one who owned the room, which in every way that had ever mattered, he was. The service doors swung shut behind him, and Victoria Hale was left standing alone in the middle of the Meridian Club, in a $4,000 suit, stained with her own champagne, as her phone began to ring again in her hand. She looked at the screen. It was her board chair. Third call. She almost didn't answer it. For one wild second, she thought about simply not answering, about walking out into the night after Jack Carter and just disappearing, leaving all of it, the company and the contract and the empire, letting it all burn without her. The trailer park girl inside her, the one she'd buried so deep, whispered that maybe that would be a mercy. But Victoria Hale had never in her life walked away from a fight. It was the best thing about her, and it was the worst thing about her, and it was the only thing she truly knew how to do. She answered the phone. Gerald, she said. Yes, I know. I know you've heard. Listen to me. Victoria. Gerald Voss had been the chairman of the board of Hale Dynamics for 11 years, and he had a voice like a closing door. Is it true? Just tell me if it's true. Did you strike a maintenance worker in front of Admiral Reyes and half the industry? Victoria closed her eyes. It's true, she said. But there's context. Gerald, there's the man is a veteran. Apparently, some kind of decorated. It's more complicated than. There is video, Victoria. I have watched it. Twice. There is no context in which a grown woman slaps a man holding a crying child and comes out the other side of it. There is no version of this that I can sell to 9 board members and 40,000 shareholders and the United States Department of Defense. Do you understand what you have done? Do you have any idea? The contract is gone. He said it flatly. You need to hear that from me right now, so you stop calculating. General Ellison's office has already informally notified our government relations team that Hale Dynamics is under review, and under review at this stage of an award is a polite way of saying, it's over. $14 billion, Victoria. 9,000 jobs. Because you couldn't control your temper for one evening. Gerald, the board is convening an emergency session at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Your presence is not required. In fact, your presence is not permitted. Do you understand what I am telling you? Victoria's hand tightened on the phone until her knuckles went white. You're forcing me out, she whispered. Of my own company. The company I built. You built it, and you just detonated it. Both things are true. There was a long pause, and when Gerald spoke again, there was something almost human in it, some grief for the woman she had been before this night. I'm sorry, Victoria. God knows you worked harder than anyone I've ever met. But there are some things you cannot come back from. And you did one of them tonight in front of 100 witnesses, and a general and a little girl. Get a lawyer. Get a good one. You're going to need it because I've just been told there are police officers on their way up to this building right now, and they are not coming for the maintenance man. The line went dead. Victoria Hale lowered the phone. Around her, the Meridian Club had gone quiet again. But it was a different quiet now. The men and women who had drifted away from her, who had made their calculations and their calls, had all begun one by one to turn back toward her. Not out of sympathy. Out of the terrible human need to watch, because they could see in the far corner where the two banks of elevators opened onto the lounge that one of the elevator doors had just slid open, and that two uniformed police officers had just stepped out, and that the club manager was pointing discreetly toward the woman standing alone in the middle of all that marble in a champagne-stained suit, and Victoria Hale, who 9 minutes ago had been the most powerful person in the room, watched them come for her, and understood at last all the way down to the bottom of her soul that there had been one person in that entire building tonight who truly held all the power. That he had held it the entire time. That he had held it not because of the scar on his jaw, or the general on the phone, or the admiral's salute, or the $14 billion. He had held it because when the whole world gave him every reason to strike back, he had knelt down instead and wiped his daughter's tears and chosen to be gentle. The officers stopped in front of her. Victoria Hale. She lifted her chin. The old fight flickered in her one last time, and then slowly it went out, and something else took its place, something that might in time, if she let it become the beginning of a different kind of person. Yes, she said quietly. That's me. The elevator ride down was the longest 90 seconds of Jack Carter's life, and not because of anything that had happened in the lounge. It was because Lily had gone quiet again, that particular 7-year-old quiet, that meant she was thinking hard about something, and Jack knew his daughter well enough to know that when she got quiet like that, a question was coming, and it was usually a big one. Daddy. Yeah, baby? Are you going to be in trouble? He crouched down in the elevator so he was level with her. Why would I be in trouble? Because the police came. Police come when someone's in trouble. Her lower lip was doing the thing it did right before she cried. Are they going to take you away? And Jack Carter, who had faced enemy fire without his heart rate climbing, felt something twist in his chest at the fear in his little girl's face. Because there is no fear on this earth, quite like a child's fear of losing the one person who is her whole world. Look at me, he said. The police did not come for me. You understand. Not for me. Not for you. Not ever. I am not going anywhere, and nobody is taking me away from you. Not tonight. Not ever. I promise you that, and have I ever broken a promise to you? No. And I'm not going to start with the biggest one. He wiped the tear that had escaped down her cheek. Now, we made a deal, you and me. And a Carter always keeps a deal. So what's the deal, Lilybug? A small watery smile. Hot chocolate. With marshmallows. With how many marshmallows? All of them. That's my girl. The elevator opened on the lobby, and Jack scooped up his toolbox and took his daughter's hand and walked out through the marble and the gold into the cold night air. and for the first time in an hour, he could breathe. The city was doing what the city always did, indifferent and enormous, and full of light, and none of it knew or cared what had just happened 40 floors up, and there was something clean about that. Something that put it all back in proportion. Up there, it had felt like the whole world. Down here, it was just one bad hour in one building among 10,000 buildings. They walked 2 blocks to the little all-night cafe on the corner that Jack had promised, the kind of place with fogged windows and a tired man behind the counter and prices that a working man could afford. And Jack ordered 1 large hot chocolate with every marshmallow they had, and 1 black coffee for himself, and they sat in a booth by the window, and Lily wrapped both her small hands around the warm cup, and Jack watched her, and let his shoulders come down from around his ears, for the first time all night. His phone buzzed. He almost didn't look at it. But it buzzed again and again, a rapid stutter of notifications, and he pulled it out of his pocket and looked at the screen and frowned. 41 text messages, 19 missed calls, from numbers he didn't recognize. "What in the world?" he murmured. He opened one. It was from a number with an out-of-state area code, and it read, "Mr. Carter, this is Dave Mullins. I own a property management group. Admiral Reyes gave me your number. I have 11 buildings, and I would be honored to have you service every one of them. Please call me anytime." The next one was similar, and the next, and then one that was different from a local news number that said, "Mr. Carter, we'd love to talk to you about what happened tonight at the Meridian Club. America needs to hear this story." Jack put the phone face down on the table. "Who's texting you, Daddy?" "Turns out a whole lot of people all of a sudden." He shook his head slowly. "You finish your cocoa. Don't worry about the phone." But the phone would not be ignored, because 40 floors up and 2 blocks away, the thing that had happened in the Meridian Club had already stopped being a private event and started becoming a public one. It had started the moment the first phone came out. And in the 22 minutes it had taken Jack Carter to walk his daughter to a cafe and order 2 drinks. The video had gone from 3 phones to 300 to 3,000, and it was at that very moment beginning the slow, terrible climb that would carry it by morning to the front page of every news site in the country. The video was 41 seconds long. Someone near the front had caught almost all of it. It began with Victoria Hale's voice, shrill and cutting, calling Jack a janitor. It caught the slap clean and clear and horrible, the crack of it, the way his head turned. It caught Lily's scream. It caught Jack pulling his daughter in against him and the blood on his face. And it caught in perfect audio the 4 words that would become a national phenomenon by Tuesday. "Are you finished?" Someone had titled it simply, "Billionaire CEO slaps veteran in front of his daughter." His response broke me. By the time Jack's coffee was cool enough to drink, the video had 200,000 views. Back in the Meridian Club, Victoria Hale was being read her rights. She stood very still while the younger of the 2 officers recited the words she had heard 10,000 times on television and never once imagined would be aimed at her. And the strangest thing was how calm she felt. It was not the calm of acceptance. It was the calm of a body in shock, the eerie floating stillness that comes over a person when the disaster is too large to feel all at once. So the mind takes it in a little at a time, like water coming into a ship, one compartment at a time. "Ms. Hale, do you understand these rights as I've explained them to you?" "Yes." "Do you have any weapons on your person?" Victoria almost laughed. "I have a phone and a lipstick, officer." "We're going to need to place you in handcuffs. It's procedure. I'm sorry." And that was the moment it broke through. The shock, the word handcuffs, and Victoria Hale looked around the room one last time at the 40 faces watching her. Some of them people she had known for a decade. Some of them people who had eaten at her table and flown on her plane and toasted her success, and not one of them stepped forward. Not one of them said a word in her defense. Not one of them could even hold her gaze. They looked at their shoes, at their phones, at the ceiling. She had spent 20 years believing these people were her allies, her peers, her world. And in the space of one evening, she had learned the oldest and hardest lesson in the world. which is that the crowd that cheers you up the mountain is not the crowd that catches you when you fall. There is no such crowd. You fall alone. The medal closed around her wrists. The retired Admiral Tom Reyes watched from across the room, and there was no satisfaction in his face. Just an old man's weariness at watching another human being destroy herself. When they walked her past him toward the elevator, she stopped for just a moment in front of him. "Admiral," she said quietly, "you spoke against me, to the general." "I told the truth, ma'am," Reyes said. "That's all. If the truth was against you, that's not my doing." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't have to. Nobody would have contradicted you. You could have stayed out of it." "No," the old admiral said. "I couldn't have. That's the difference between us, Ms. Hale. And I suspect it's a difference you're only now beginning to understand." He paused. "For what it's worth, I hope you find your way through this. I've seen people come back from worse. But you're going to have to become somebody new to do it, and that's the hardest thing a person can do." They took her down in the elevator. They walked her out through the lobby that Jack Carter had walked through 25 minutes earlier, out into the same cold night air, except that where Jack had walked out a free man with his daughter's hand in his, Victoria Hale walked out in handcuffs into the strobing red and blue of the police cruiser. And there was already impossibly a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk with their phones up, because the video was spreading and people talk, and word had gotten out that something was happening at the Meridian. And so Victoria Hale's perp walk was filmed from 9 different angles by strangers who did not know her and would never know her, but would share the footage with everyone they'd ever met. She ducked her head into the back of the cruiser. The door shut. And through the window as the car pulled away from the curb, Victoria Hale saw on the corner 2 blocks down the fogged window of a little all-night cafe. And through that window, though she could not have possibly seen it at that distance, and in that dark, she imagined she saw a man and a little girl in a booth, sharing a hot chocolate, and the image stayed with her the whole way to the precinct, and it would stay with her for a very long time after that. At the cafe, Lily had marshmallow foam on her upper lip and was telling her father a very long and involved story about a girl at school named Madison, who had a lunchbox that played music, and Jack was listening to every word of it, nodding at the right moments, asking the right questions, because this right here was the only thing in the entire world that Jack Carter had ever truly wanted. Not money, not recognition, not the 11 business cards in his pocket, or the general's gratitude, or the admiral's salute. Just this. His girl safe and warm, and talking his ear off about a musical lunchbox on the other side of a bad hour that hadn't touched her. Not really, because he hadn't let it. His phone buzzed again. He turned it over. It was a call this time, not a text, and the number was one he actually recognized because it belonged to his boss, Ray Delgado, the man who owned the little HVAC company, whose name was stitched on Jack's shirt. Ray was 63 years old, ran the whole operation out of a garage and a beat-up van, and had given Jack a job 3 years ago when nobody else would. No questions asked when Jack had come to him quiet and scarred and unwilling to talk about where he'd been. And Ray had just said, "Can you fix an air handler?" And Jack had said yes, and that had been the whole interview. Jack answered. "Ray, it's late. Everything okay?" "Jack?" Ray's voice was strange, shaky. "Jack, are you all right? Somebody sent me there's a video, Jack, of you, at that job I sent you on tonight. There's a video, and it's Jack, some woman hit you. Is that real? Did that really happen?" Jack glanced at Lily, who was busy fishing a sunken marshmallow out of her cup with a spoon, and he lowered his voice. "It's real, Ray. It's handled. We're fine. I'm sitting here with Lily right now having a hot chocolate. It's all fine. It is not fine." "There's a Jack, the video's got 500,000 views. 500,000. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. People are calling the shop. News people. Other contractors. A guy just called and offered to buy the whole company, Jack. He offered me more money than I've made in 20 years, just because your name's on it now, just because you work here. I don't even understand what's happening." Jack rubbed his eyes. "Ray, listen to me. Don't sell the company. Don't do anything tonight. Don't answer any more calls. Turn your phone off and go to bed, and we'll figure it out in the morning with clear heads. Can you do that for me?" "Jack, who are you?" Ray's voice cracked. 3 years you worked for me, and you never once the videos got people saying you're some kind of war hero, that you saved a whole platoon, that there's generals calling you by name. Is that true? Is any of that true? There was a long pause. That was a long time ago, Ray, Jack said quietly. And it doesn't change anything about who I am now. I'm the same guy who fixed your compressor last Tuesday. I'm the same guy who's going to show up Monday morning and do the work. That's all I am. That's all I want to be. Okay. Ray was quiet for a moment, and then, in a rough voice, he said, "You're a good man, Jack. I always knew you were a good man. I just didn't know you were—" He stopped. "Get some sleep, son. Kiss that little girl for me." Jack hung up. He looked at his daughter. "Everything okay, Daddy?" "Everything's great, baby. Ray says hi." He reached over and wiped the marshmallow off her lip with a napkin. "You about ready to head home? It's way past a certain little girl's bedtime." 5 more minutes? 2 more minutes? 4. 3. And that's my final offer, and I want you to know I'm a very tough negotiator, so you did real well getting 3. Lily grinned and went back to her cocoa, and Jack sat back in the booth and looked out the fogged window at the city and let himself for just a moment feel the full strange weight of the night. He had not wanted any of this. He had spent 3 years building a small, quiet life out of the wreckage of the loud, violent one, a life where nobody knew his name and nobody expected anything of him except that he show up and fix what was broken, and he had loved that life had needed that life had built it one ordinary day at a time, as carefully as a man defusing a bomb. And now, because a stranger had lost her temper and a bystander had a phone, the loud world he had walked away from was reaching back into the quiet one and pulling him toward it, and he could feel it happening, and he didn't know yet whether he had the strength to stop it or whether he even should. But that was a Monday problem. Tonight was still Friday, and tonight his daughter had marshmallow on her face and a story about a musical lunchbox, and that was enough. That was more than enough. Meanwhile, across the city at the 14th precinct, Victoria Hale was learning what the inside of a holding cell looked like. It was smaller than her office bathroom. That was her first thought, and she was ashamed of it even as she thought it, but it was true. And it was the kind of thought that a lifetime of wealth trains into a person so deeply that it comes unbidden even in the worst moments. The cell was small, and it smelled of industrial cleaner and old fear. And there was a metal bench, and a metal toilet, and a woman in the corner who was sleeping, or pretending to. And Victoria Hale sat down on the far end of the bench in her champagne-stained $4,000 suit, and put her face in her hands. Her lawyer had told her in a hurried phone call from the booking area that she would likely be released on bail within a few hours, that the charge was misdemeanor assault, that it was serious but survivable, that the real war would not be fought in this precinct, but in the court of public opinion and the boardroom and the contract review, and that she needed to say absolutely nothing to anyone about anything until he could be physically present. And then he had said in a lower voice, a voice with something careful in it, "Victoria, the video. Have you seen the video? No. Don't. Not tonight. There's nothing to be gained from it tonight, and it will only just don't watch it tonight. Promise me." "How bad is it, David?" There had been a long pause. "It's the worst thing I've ever seen a client do on camera in 30 years of practice," her lawyer had said quietly. "And I once had a client who set his own warehouse on fire for the insurance and got caught by his own security camera. Don't watch it. Get some rest. I'll have you out by morning." But of course she watched it, because you always watch it. Because the human mind cannot leave a wound alone. Because at 3 o'clock in the morning, alone on a metal bench in a holding cell, with her one phone call used up, and nothing to do but sit with herself. Victoria Hale took out the phone they had not yet taken from her, because in the chaos of the arrest, someone had forgotten to, and she typed her own name into the search bar with shaking fingers. And there it was at the top already with 2.1 million views. She watched herself scream at a stranger. She watched herself insult his child. She watched herself from the outside for the first time in her life, and she saw not a powerful woman defending herself, but a cruel one, attacking a man who had done nothing. A man holding a little girl, and she watched her own hand come up, and she watched it connect, and she heard the crack, and she heard the child scream, and she watched the man not fight back, watched him pull his daughter close and ask in a voice she now understood held more strength than she had shown in her entire life. "Are you finished?" And Victoria Hale, alone in a cell, watched the video of the worst thing she had ever done, and then she watched it again, and then a third time, and somewhere in the third viewing, something inside her that had been frozen solid for 30 years. Some hard and ancient thing she had built when she was a little girl, hiding behind a couch, finally cracked all the way through, and she began to cry. Really cry. The kind of crying that comes up from the floor of a person, and she cried for the man she had hurt, and for his frightened daughter, and for the 9,000 people whose jobs she had gambled, and for the company she had spent her life building and blown apart in 9 minutes. But most of all, though she could barely admit it to herself, she cried for the little girl she had once been, the one who had promised herself she would never be looked down on again, and who had kept that promise so well that she had become the thing that looks down, and had not even noticed the transformation until a 7-year-old with marshmallow on her face looked up at her and said, "You have sad eyes." The woman in the corner of the cell stirred. "You okay over there?" Victoria wiped her face. "No," she said honestly. "No, I don't think I am." "First time in Seoul, yes." The woman nodded slowly, taking her in the suit, the shoes, the whole ruined package. "You that lady from the video, the one that hit the vet." Victoria closed her eyes. Even here it had reached. Yes, she expected contempt. She expected the woman to spit at her, to curse her, to do any of the things Victoria felt she deserved. But instead, the woman was quiet for a moment, and then she said in a voice that was rougher and kinder than Victoria had any right to expect, "My brother came back from over there, real messed up. Couldn't sleep, couldn't hold a job, couldn't be around people. Took him about 6 years to get right, and he only got right because a couple people didn't give up on him when he was at his worst." She shifted on her bench. "I'm not saying what you did wasn't bad. It was real bad. I watched it 3 times myself, and I wanted to reach through the phone. But I'm going to tell you what my grandmother told me because you look like you need to hear it. The worst thing you ever did is not the truest thing about you. It's just the loudest thing about you right now tonight. Whether it stays the truest thing, that part's up to you." Victoria stared at the woman. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked. "I don't deserve it." The woman shrugged. "Probably not. But my grandmother didn't say only be kind to people who deserve it. That'd be pretty easy. Anybody can do that." She lay back down and closed her eyes. "Get some sleep if you can. Morning comes either way." And Victoria Hale sat in the dark and thought about the fact that in one single night she had been shown more genuine grace by a maintenance worker. She had assaulted his 7-year-old daughter and a stranger in a jail cell than she had been shown in 20 years of penthouses and private planes and people who called themselves her friends. And she thought about what that meant. And she did not like the answer, because the answer was that she had spent her whole life surrounded by the wrong things, chasing the wrong things, becoming the wrong thing. And it had taken losing all of it in a single night to finally see clearly what had been true the entire time. Morning came as the woman had promised. Jack Carter woke at 6 the way he always did, out of a habit that 20 years of service and 3 years of civilian life had not been able to break. He lay still for a moment in the small bedroom of the small apartment he shared with his daughter, and he listened to the sound of her breathing through the thin wall, and he felt, as he did every single morning, a gratitude so large it was almost painful. Then he got up and started the coffee and turned on his phone, which he had left off overnight, and it began to buzz and buzz and buzz, and it did not stop for a very long time. 230 text messages, 86 missed calls, and when he opened his browser, his own face and his daughter's looking up at him from the front page of the news. He stood in his small kitchen in the gray morning light, coffee going cold in his hand, and he read the headline, and then he read it again, and he understood that the quiet life he had built so carefully was over, that it had ended. The moment a woman raised her hand in a marble room, and that there was no getting it back. Now, no matter how much he wanted it, no matter how hard he tried. "Daddy?" Lily stood in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, hair a wild nest. "Why's your phone making so much noise?" Jack looked at his daughter, and he made a decision right there in the kitchen, the same kind of decision he had made in a valley with no name. 19 years ago, the decision to face the thing that was coming, rather than run from it, because running had never once in his life made anything better. "Because," he said, and he set down his coffee, and crouched down, and opened his arms, and she walked into them, and he lifted her up. "A whole lot of people saw how brave you were last night, and they want to say thank you." "I wasn't brave," Lily mumbled into his shoulder. "I was scared." "Baby," Jack said, holding her, feeling her warm and safe and real against him, while the phone buzzed itself off the counter and clattered to the floor, ignored unimportant nothing at all compared to this. Being scared and being brave are the same thing. Being brave is just being scared and doing the right thing anyway. And you did the right thing. You held on to your daddy, and you didn't let the mean stuff make you mean. And last night that made you the bravest person in a room full of the most important people in the whole country. He kissed the top of her head. "Don't ever forget that. No matter what happens next, you were the bravest one there." And downstairs, on the sidewalk in front of their building, the first news van was already pulling up to the curb. The first reporter knocked on the door of the little apartment at 7:40 in the morning, and Jack Carter did not answer it. He stood in the kitchen with Lily on his hip, and he listened to the knock, polite at first, then insistent, then joined by a second knock and a third, and he understood that the vans on the street were only the beginning. That the quiet life was not just ending, but ending fast, and he made himself take a slow breath, the way he'd been trained to do when everything went sideways at once. Panic is a luxury for people who have time. Jack had never had time, and he did not have it now. "Are we going to answer it?" Lily whispered. "No, baby, not right now. Right now we're going to have breakfast like it's a regular Saturday, because it is a regular Saturday, and those folks out there can wait." He set her down at the little kitchen table. "You want eggs or cereal?" "Can I have eggs the way you make them with the cheese in the middle?" "You can absolutely have eggs the way I make them with the cheese in the middle." And so, while reporters knocked, and phones buzzed, and his own face sat frozen on the front page of a dozen news sites, Jack Carter made his daughter cheese eggs, and he made them well, and he sat across from her, and ate his own, and drank his cold coffee, and asked her what she wanted to do that day, and the ordinariness of it. The sheer stubborn ordinariness was the most defiant thing he could have done. The world wanted to make him a symbol. He was going to be a father having breakfast with his kid for as long as he possibly could. It was during the eggs that the phone rang with a number he recognized, and he stepped into the other room to take it. "Ray?" "Jack." Ray Delgado sounded like he hadn't slept. "Jack, there's about 6 news trucks outside the shop, and my wife is scared, and I don't know what to tell anybody. What do I do?" "You don't tell them anything, Ray. You don't have to talk to a single one of them. It's your property, you can ask them to leave. Lock the shop, take Maria, and go to your sister's for the day. Let it blow over." "Blow over?" Ray laughed a little wildly. "Jack, it's not blowing over, it's blowing up. You've seen the numbers. The video's got 9 million views. 9 million. There's a hashtag. People are calling you the..." He stopped. "There's people saying real nice things about you, Jack. And there's a couple saying you must have provoked her, that nobody gets slapped for nothing. You know how people are? But it's mostly Jack. It's mostly people who are just, they're moved by it. By what you did. By not hitting back. There's a guy, a big veterans organization, they want to give you some kind of award. There's a lawyer called, says he'll represent you for free. Says you've got a slam dunk civil case worth millions. Millions, Jack." Jack was quiet for a moment. "I don't want millions, Ray. I know you don't. That's exactly why everybody's losing their minds over you. Because you don't want anything. You know how rare that is. A man who doesn't want anything?" Ray's voice thickened. "Look, I've been doing some thinking. This company, This little garage operation, it's got your name on it now, whether either of us wanted that or not. And I'm 63 years old, and my knees are shot, and I've been thinking about hanging it up for 2 years anyway. So here's what I want to say to you. And I want you to just listen before you say no, because I know you're going to want to say no. Ray, just listen. I want to make you a partner. Full partner 50-50, and then in a couple years when I retire, I want you to have the whole thing. Not because of the video. Because you're the best I've ever worked with. And because you're a good man. And because in 3 years, you never once let me down. Not one time. And a man like that ought to own something. That's all. That's the whole speech. Jack closed his eyes and leaned his head against the wall. In the kitchen, he could hear Lily humming to herself, scraping the last of the cheese eggs off her plate. Ray, I don't know what to say. Say yes, or say you'll think about it. Just don't say no yet. I'll think about it. That's the truth, I really will think about it. But not today. Today I've got a little girl who deserves a normal Saturday, and I'm gonna find a way to give it to her, even if I have to sneak us both out the back. You do that, son. You do that. A pause. Hey, Jack. For what it's worth. My dad was in Korea. Never talked about it, not once, not till he was dying. And the last thing he ever said to me, he grabbed my hand, and he said the ones who did the real hard things are the ones who never brag about it. The braggers were mostly in the back. I never understood that till I saw that video of you last night. Ray's voice broke. You take care of that little girl. You call me Monday. Jack hung up and stood in the hallway for a moment, and then he went back into the kitchen, and his daughter looked up at him with cheese on her chin and said, Was that Ray? Did you say hi from me? And he said, I did. And he says you're his favorite person in the whole company, and I'm a little jealous. And she laughed, and for a moment, the vans and the reporters and the 9 million views did not exist. But they did exist. And by 10 o'clock that morning, the story had grown a second head, because the internet had done what the internet always does, which is dig, and someone had found the thing Jack had spent 3 years hoping no one would ever find. They found the citation. It was public record, technically buried in a database that most people didn't know how to search, and it described in the careful, bloodless language of military commendations an action that had taken place on a date that was redacted in a location that was redacted, in which a sergeant major name partially redacted had, quote, with complete disregard for his own safety, advanced alone under sustained enemy fire to reach a pinned and encircled element, and over the course of several hours had personally coordinated and executed the extraction of 11 soldiers from a position that had been assessed as untenable, sustaining wounds in the process and refusing evacuation until every last man had been recovered. The citation ended with the words, His actions are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. And someone matched the redacted date to the story. And someone else found a soldier who had been there, one of the 11, a man named Danny Okafor, who now ran a hardware store in Ohio. And Danny Okafor did something that Jack Carter had never asked for and would never have wanted. He talked. Danny Okafor sat in front of a camera in his hardware store in Ohio. A big, gentle man with gray at his temples, and he cried openly without shame, and he told the whole country what had happened in that valley 19 years ago. We were going to die, Danny said. I want to be real clear about that. There is no version of that night where any of us lived. We were surrounded. We were out of ammo. We had wounded. We couldn't move. And command told us straight up they couldn't reach us before dawn. And dawn was 6 hours away, and we did not have 6 minutes. I called my wife. We were allowed one call, and I called my wife to say goodbye. I was 22 years old, and I told my wife goodbye. He wiped his face. And then this voice comes over a busted radio, and it's calm. It's so calm. It's like a guy ordering a sandwich, and it says, hold your position. I'm coming to you. One man. He came down into that valley on foot in the dark alone. And I don't know how he did what he did. I have thought about it every single day for 19 years, and I still don't understand it, but one at a time, he got us out. All 11 of us. He took 2 rounds doing it, and he would not stop, He would not let them pull him out until every single one of us was clear. The last thing I remember, before I passed out from blood loss, is him carrying Marcus Bell over his shoulder and telling all of us, nobody stays behind. Nobody stays behind. Danny Okafor looked directly into the camera. That man's name is Jack Carter, and last night I watched a video of some billionaire slapping him across the face and calling him a janitor while he held his little girl. And I have never in my life been so angry, and then I watched him not hit back, and I was not surprised. Not even a little. Because that is exactly who he is. He was the strongest man any of us ever knew, and he never once used it to hurt anybody who didn't have it coming. Jack, if you're watching this, it's Danny, it's Okafor. I named my boy after you. He's 16 now. He knows what you did. And there are 11 families in this country, and all our kids and all our grandkids that haven't even been born yet that exist because of you. 11 of us went home because you wouldn't leave. So you let these people love you, Jack. You've earned it. God knows you earned it. We love you, brother. We always did. The video of Danny Okafor got 20 million views by nightfall. Jack watched it on his phone alone, standing in his bathroom with the door closed and the fan running so Lily wouldn't hear, and Jack Carter, who had not cried in 19 years, who had held it together through the slap and the arrest and the reporters and everything else, sat down on the edge of the bathtub and put his face in his hands and wept for the men he had carried, and the ones he hadn't been able to, because there were always the ones you couldn't. That was the part nobody put in the citations, and he had carried them too every day for 19 years, and to hear Danny's voice, to hear that Danny had named his boy after him, to hear that they were all still out there living their lives, having kids running hardware stores. It broke something loose in Jack that had been jammed tight for a very long time. When he came out of the bathroom, his eyes were red, and Lily noticed because she noticed everything. "Daddy, were you crying?" Jack considered lying. He'd have been within his rights. But he'd made a promise to himself a long time ago that he would never teach his daughter that men aren't allowed to feel things because he had grown up believing that lie and it had nearly killed him. "Yeah, baby," he said. "I was." "Why are you sad?" "No." He picked her up. "No, these were good tears. Sometimes when something makes you really happy or really grateful, it comes out looking like sad tears, but it's the opposite. Some old friends of mine said some real kind things about me today, and it filled me up so full it had to spill over a little. That's all." "Oh." Lily considered this. "Like when the bathtub gets too full and it goes over the edge." Jack laughed, and it turned into something halfway between a laugh and a sob, and he hugged her tight. "Exactly like that. Exactly like that, you smart girl." Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Victoria Hale walked out of the precinct at 11 in the morning, released on bail, into a wall of cameras and shouted questions, and a world that had in the span of one night turned completely against her. Her lawyer had told her to say nothing, and she said nothing, and she kept her head down and let him steer her to the car through the shouting. And she did not look up at the cameras, because she had watched the video now 6 or 7 times, and she knew what her face looked like when the cameras caught it. And she did not want to give them any more of it. She got into the car, the door shut, the shouting became muffled, and her lawyer David, a careful gray man in a careful gray suit, let out a long breath and said, "Okay, we're clear. How are you holding up?" "The board voted this morning," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. "Didn't they?" David hesitated. 7:15, emergency session. It was unanimous, Victoria. They removed you as CEO effective immediately. Gerald Voss is acting chief until they find a permanent replacement. There's a statement going out at noon. He watched her carefully. "I'm sorry." Victoria looked out of the window at the city sliding past. 22 years. She had started that company at a card table in a rented room with a business plan she'd written by hand because she couldn't afford a computer. And she had grown it into a titan of the American defense industry. And this morning, 9 people in a conference room had unmade her in a 15-minute meeting she wasn't even allowed to attend. "The contract?" she asked. "General Ellison's office issued a formal notice an hour ago. Hale Dynamics has been removed from consideration for the LGM award pending a full ethics and conduct review that realistically the company will not survive in its current form. The award will almost certainly go to the competing bid. He paused. $14 billion, Victoria. And 9,000 jobs, which is the part that's going to hurt the company most in the press. That's the number the reporters are running with. Not the 14 billion. The 9,000 families. Victoria closed her eyes. I did that. The board's official position is going to be that it was an isolated act by an individual and not reflective of company values, and they're going to spend the next year proving it by very publicly separating themselves from you in every way they possibly can. David said it gently, but he said it because it was his job to make sure she understood. You need to prepare yourself. The people you thought were your friends, the people who owe you their careers, they are going to line up to condemn you, because condemning you is now the price of saving themselves. Do not take it personally. It's not personal. It's survival. It's exactly personal, Victoria said quietly. That's what makes it hurt. The car drove on, and Victoria Hale, former CEO, former Titan, watched her city go by, and understood that she was for the first time since she was a teenager, clawing her way out of a trailer park, nobody. Worse than nobody. She was a cautionary tale. She was a hashtag. She was the woman in the video. There's more, David said carefully, and I need you to hear it from me before you see it somewhere else. What? The maintenance worker, Jack Carter. He's not just a veteran. David pulled up something on his phone and handed it to her. He's this. Victoria took the phone. She watched the video of Danny Okafor. She watched a grown man weep in a hardware store in Ohio and describe how Jack Carter had walked alone into an impossible place to carry 11 men out of certain death, how he'd taken 2 bullets doing it, how he'd refused to leave until every last one was saved. She watched him say, nobody stays behind. She watched him say, I named my boy after you. And Victoria Hale, who had slapped that man across the face and called him a janitor, and tried to have him arrested and threatened to destroy the small company that fed his daughter, handed the phone back to her lawyer with a hand that would not stop shaking and said in a voice she barely recognized as her own, Oh my God. Oh my God. David, what did I do? What kind of person did I become? What did I do? And she began to cry. And this time it was different from the crying in the cell, because the crying in the cell had been for herself for what she'd lost. And this crying was for him, for what she'd done to a man who had given more than she could comprehend and asked for nothing. And somewhere in the difference between those two kinds of crying was the first small seed of the person Victoria Hale might someday, if she worked at it for the rest of her life, manage to become. By that afternoon, the story had become a national conversation, and it had split the way these things always do, into the thing itself and the arguments about the thing. Most of the country had simply been moved. They saw a good man wronged and responding with grace. They saw a war hero revealed. They saw a little girl comforted by her father in the worst moment. And it touched something real in them, something tired and hungry, for exactly this, for proof that quiet decency still existed and could still win. Veterans groups rallied around Jack. Ordinary people sent messages and offered help and shared the video with notes that said things like, This is the kind of man I want my son to be, and I've watched this 10 times, and I cry every time, and he had every reason to hit back, and he chose his daughter instead, God bless him. But there were others. There are always others. A few voices, loud out of proportion to their number, insisted that there had to be more to it, that a woman like Victoria Hale didn't just slap someone, for no reason, that Jack must have done something, said something, that the video was edited, that the whole thing was staged, that a war hero working as an HVAC tech was too good to be true, and probably a fabrication. And a certain kind of media hungry for a fight gave those voices airtime, because grace doesn't make people click, but controversy does. And for about 6 hours on Saturday afternoon, there was a real and ugly attempt to turn the story inside out to make Jack the villain and Victoria the victim of a mob. And that was when the retired Admiral Tom Reyes went on television. He had not planned to. He was 78 years old, and he had spent his whole life avoiding cameras. But he watched the ugliness start to spread on Saturday afternoon, watched people he'd never met try to tear down a man he'd shaken hands with, a man he knew in his bones was the real thing, and something in the old sailor would not stand for it. He called a producer he knew. He said he had been in the room. He said he would say so on the record. And at 6 o'clock that evening, in his old dress uniform, with 3 decades of ribbons on his chest, Admiral Tom Reyes, United States Navy retired, looked into a camera and told the truth. "I was 6 feet away," he said. "I saw all of it. There was no provocation. None." The man's daughter, a little girl 7 years old, stumbled and brushed against Ms. Hale's arm and spilled a drop of champagne. That is the entire crime. A child stumbled. And Ms. Hale berated that man, insulted him, insulted his child, and when he tried to simply walk away with his daughter, she struck him across the face hard enough to draw blood. He never raised a hand. He never raised his voice. He pulled his little girl in close so she wouldn't have to see anymore, and he asked the woman very quietly if she was finished. The old admiral's jaw tightened. "I have worn this uniform for 31 years. I have commanded men in combat. And I am telling you as an officer and as an old man who has seen just about everything a person can see, that Jack Carter showed more genuine courage in that room, unarmed, holding his daughter, refusing to strike back, than most men show in a lifetime. Anyone trying to tell you a different story is either lying to you or selling you something. That's all I have to say. That's the truth, and now you've heard it from someone who was there." And that was the end of the ugliness. It didn't die all at once. These things never do. But the admiral in his uniform with his ribbons and his gravity and his obvious unimpeachable integrity drove a stake through the heart of it. And by Sunday morning, the country had made up its mind. And its mind was with Jack. Jack, for his part, had said nothing to anyone. He had turned down every interview, declined every award, ignored every offer, and spent the weekend doing exactly what he had told Ray he would do, which was give his daughter a normal Saturday and a normal Sunday, which he accomplished by loading her into his old truck early each morning before the reporters were awake and driving out of the city to places where nobody knew his face. A state park, a diner 2 towns over, a fishing spot his own father had taken him to 40 years before. And on Sunday afternoon, sitting on the bank of that fishing spot with a line in the water, and his daughter beside him, drawing pictures of the ducks. Jack finally turned his phone all the way off and put it in the glove box of the truck and did not turn it back on. And for a few hours, the most talked about man in America simply ceased to exist and became again what he had always most wanted to be, which was a father, teaching his little girl how to be patient enough to wait for a fish. "Daddy," Lily said, watching her bobber, "that lady, the sad eyes lady, is she in trouble?" Jack was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, baby. She's in a lot of trouble. Because she hit you. Because she hit me, and because of some other things, 2 grown-up things. But yeah, mostly because she hit me." Lily thought about this the way she thought about everything, with a seriousness that was almost comical in someone so small. "Are you glad she's in trouble?" And this, Jack knew, was one of those questions. One of the ones that would stick, that she would remember, that would become part of the architecture of the person she was going to be. He put down his fishing rod, and he turned to face his daughter fully, because some answers you give sideways, and some you give straight on, and this one you gave straight on. "No," he said. "I'm not glad, baby. I don't take any happiness from somebody else's suffering, not even somebody who hurt me. And I don't want you to either. That lady did a bad thing, a real bad thing, and there's consequences for bad things, and that's right and fair. But being glad about it, wanting to see her hurt, carrying that around inside you, that doesn't do a single thing to her. It only poisons you. You understand? The trouble she's in, she made that herself with her own hand. I didn't make it, and I don't have to feel good or bad about it. I just have to keep on being who I want to be, and so do you. So, who do you want to be, Daddy?" Jack smiled and reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Your dad," he said simply. "That's the whole list. That's the only thing on it. I just want to be your dad, and to do it good enough that when you grow up you're kind and you're brave and you don't let anybody make you mean. That's all I've ever wanted from the second I first held you. Everything else is just noise." Lily leaned her head against his arm. "You're doing a good job," she said. And Jack Carter, war hero national phenomenon, the man the whole country was talking about, sat on a riverbank with his daughter's head against his arm, and decided that of every commendation he had ever received or ever would, that one from that small, serious person was the only one that had ever really mattered. His bobber dipped, then it dipped again, then it went under. "Daddy? Daddy, you got one?" And for the next 10 minutes, there was nothing in the entire world but a man and his daughter, and a fish on the line laughing, and the water, and the late gold light, and not one single thought about Victoria Hale, or the video, or the millions of people watching, or the life that was waiting to reach back in and change everything the moment he turned that phone back on. That would come. It was already coming. Even now, in a quiet office across the city, General Raymond Ellison was making arrangements that would pull Jack Carter back toward the world he'd left. And in a lawyer's conference room, a civil case worth more money than Jack had ever imagined was being assembled, whether he wanted it or not. And in a small rented apartment where she had gone because her penthouse was surrounded by cameras, Victoria Hale was sitting alone at a table with a pen and a blank sheet of paper, trying and failing and trying again to begin a letter that started with the words, "Dear Mr. Carter, there are no words, but I have to try anyway." But none of that had reached the riverbank yet. On the riverbank, there was only the fish and the girl and her father and the light on the water. And for one more perfect hour, that was enough. That was everything. The letter took Victoria Hale 11 days to write, and when it was finished, it was 4 pages long, and then she threw it away and started over. Because 4 pages was a woman trying to explain herself, and Jack Carter did not need her explanation. He needed the truth, plainly said, and nothing more. So she started again, and this time she wrote until there was nothing left to say. And what remained when she stopped was less than 1 page, and it was the truest thing she had ever written in her life. She wrote, "Mr. Carter, I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness. I have no right to it, and I would not insult you by asking. I am writing because you deserve to hear from me directly, and not through a lawyer or a statement that I know exactly what I did. I struck a man who had done nothing to me in front of his child, because I was angry at things that had nothing to do with you, and because somewhere in the last 20 years, I became a person who believed that having money meant I was allowed to treat people like they were less than me. Your daughter said I had sad eyes. She was right. I have been sad and afraid for a very long time, and I hid it behind cruelty, and I made you the target of it, and there is no excuse in the world that makes that acceptable. I am not writing to tell you I have changed because 11 days is not enough time to change, and I would not ask you to believe it. I am writing to tell you that I am trying to. That is all. That and one more thing. Your little girl looked at the worst person in that room and tried to be kind to her. You are raising her right. Whatever else falls apart in my life, and most of it has, I will carry the memory of that child's kindness for as long as I live, and I will spend whatever time I have left trying to deserve to have received it. I am sorry. Victoria Hale. She did not send it to his home. She did not know his home address, and would not have used it if she had, because showing up at his door even by mail felt like one more violation of a man she had already violated enough. Instead, she sent it to Ray Delgado's shop in a plain envelope with a note asking Ray to please pass it along only if he thought Jack would want to receive it, and to throw it away if he didn't, and that either choice was fine, and that she was sorry to involve him at all. Ray read the note. Ray was a good judge of people. 63 years of running a small business had made him one, and he held that envelope for 2 full days before he decided what to do with it. And what he finally decided was that it was not his to decide. So on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the slap, he handed it to Jack at the end of a long workday, The two of them standing in the garage that was now on paper half Jack's, because Jack had said yes to the partnership on the Monday, exactly the way Ray had hoped he would. "This came for you," Ray said. "From her, from the Hale woman. I almost pitched it. I want you to know I almost pitched it and I wouldn't have felt bad about it, but it didn't seem right me making that call for you. So." He held it out. "You do whatever you want with it. Burn it. Read it, throw it in the river. No wrong answer." Jack took the envelope and looked at it for a long moment. His name was written on the front in a careful hand. He did not open it there. He put it in his jacket pocket, and he finished closing up the shop with Ray, and he drove home, and he made Lily her dinner, and helped her with her spelling words, and read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through together, and tucked her in, and kissed her forehead, and turned out her light. And only then, sitting alone at his kitchen table, with a cup of coffee going cold, did Jack Carter take out the envelope, and open it and read what Victoria Hale had written. He read it twice. And when he was done, he sat there for a long time, and he did not feel triumph, and he did not feel anger, and he did not feel the satisfaction that a lesser man might have felt at holding in his hands the surrender of the person who had wronged him. What he felt mostly was tired. And underneath the tired, something quieter and harder to name, something that was almost but not quite compassion. Because Jack Carter had seen a lot of people at the worst moment of their lives. It was in a sense the thing he had been trained to do, to be present at the worst moment and to act well inside it. And he had learned a long time ago in places he did not talk about, that the worst moment of a person's life is not the truest measure of them. What matters is what they do after, whether they let the worst moment define them, or whether they climb up out of it and become something better. And he did not know yet what Victoria Hale would do with her worst moment. But he knew that she had written him the truth, or as close to it as she could get, and that this was more than most people ever managed, and it moved him a little against his will. He did not write back. There was nothing to write. But he did not throw the letter away either. He folded it back into its envelope, and he put it in the drawer, where he kept the small handful of things that mattered: his father's watch, his daughter's first drawing, the folded flag from a funeral he did not talk about, and he closed the drawer, and that was the answer, though Victoria would never know it. He had kept it. From a man like Jack, keeping it was the whole reply. The weeks that followed reshaped every life the slap had touched, though not always in the ways the world expected. The civil suit that the lawyers had assembled, the slam-dunk case worth millions. Jack settled quietly and fast, and he did not keep the money. This became public later, and when it did, it moved the country all over again, because what Jack Carter did with the settlement from Victoria Hale was he took every dollar of it and he put it into a foundation, and the foundation had one purpose, which was to help veterans coming home find work and housing and their footing in a civilian world that too often forgot them the moment the parades were over. He named the foundation Nobody Stays Behind. And when a reporter finally cornered him and asked him why he hadn't kept a cent of it, Jack, who had spent weeks refusing to talk to anyone, gave the only interview he would ever give, and it was 3 sentences long. "I've got everything I need," he said. "There's men who came home with nothing and got forgotten, and that's not right. And now there's a little money to do something about it. Seemed like the obvious thing to do with it." That was the whole interview, and it was more powerful than any speech, because it was so plainly, obviously true, and the country had by then learned that when Jack Carter said something, he meant it exactly, no more and no less. The foundation grew fast. Danny Okafor flew in from Ohio to help run it and never went back. Closed his hardware store and moved his family because he said some things matter more than a store. Marcus Bell. The bodyguard who had quit on the spot in the Meridian Club showed up at the foundation's door one morning unannounced and asked if there was work for a man who knew how to keep people safe and had spent 6 years doing the wrong thing for the wrong person. And Jack looked at him for a long moment. This man he had carried out of a valley 19 years ago and not recognized until that night in the lounge, and Jack said, "There's always work here for a man who wants to make it right." And Marcus Bell wept in the doorway, a 51-year-old mountain of a man, crying like a boy. And then he came inside, and he stayed. The 9,000 jobs at Hale Dynamics, the ones everyone had feared were lost, were mostly saved, though not by anyone the story had made famous. The company was broken up and sold in pieces, and the pieces were bought by competitors, who needed the workers more than they needed the wreckage of the brand, and most of the engineers and machinists and technicians kept their livelihoods transferred to new employers, with barely a gap in their paychecks. The $14 billion contract went to the competing bid, as General Ellison had predicted, and the general made sure in the quiet way that powerful men can that the workers were protected in the transition. And he did it. He told exactly one person, because it was what Jack would have wanted, and he had spent 19 years wishing he could do something for Jack Carter, and this was the closest he was ever going to get. And Victoria Hale pled guilty. Her lawyer told her not to told her they could fight it, told her that a good defense could get the assault charge reduced, or even dismissed, given her lack of prior record and her willingness to pay for anger management and community service. And Victoria listened to all of it. And then she said no. She said she was tired of fighting. She said she had spent her whole life fighting, and it had made her into someone she could no longer stand to be. And that the one thing she had never done, not once, was simply stand up and admit she was wrong, and accept what came, and that she was going to do it now, and that it was in a strange way the first free choice she had made in 20 years. So she stood up in a courtroom, and she pled guilty to misdemeanor assault, and she looked at the judge and she said without being asked, "I did it. I hit a man who did nothing to deserve it in front of his child. I have no defense, and I offer none. Whatever the court decides, I will accept it, and I want it on the record that I believe I deserve it." And the judge, who had seen 10,000 defendants perform contrition, looked at her for a long moment, because he could tell the difference between the performance and the real thing, and he saw that this was the real thing, and it seemed to move him, though he did not show it much. He sentenced her to probation, community service, and a fine, and he added, which he did not have to a single sentence from the bench, "Ms. Hale," he said, "I have been doing this for 26 years, and I will tell you that the ones who stand up and take it are rarer than you would think, and they are almost always the ones who go on to become someone worth knowing. I hope you're one of them. Court is adjourned." The community service the court assigned her was generic, some hours at a food bank, the standard sentence. But Victoria did not stop when her hours were served. She kept going. She showed up at that food bank every week, and then twice a week, and the people there who at first had recognized her and been wary, the woman from the video, slowly stopped seeing the video when they looked at her, and started seeing the woman who showed up reliably, without cameras, and did the unglamorous work of stacking cans and sorting donations, and never once asked for credit. And one day, months in the director of the food bank, a tired, kind woman named Rosa, who ran the whole operation on grit and grants, asked Victoria if it was true that she used to run a big company, and Victoria said yes, and Rosa said, "We're drowning in the back office. Grants logistics, the whole thing's held together with tape. Any chance somebody who ran a big company could help me not drown?" And Victoria Hale, who had once commanded a $14 billion empire, sat down at a folding table in the back of a food bank and untangled their grant applications and rebuilt their supply logistics and set up their books properly for the first time in the organization's history. And she did it for free. And she found to her genuine astonishment that it was the most satisfying work she had done in her entire life. Because for the first time, the thing she was good at was being used to feed people instead of to beat competitors. And the difference she discovered was the difference between being full and being empty. And she had been empty for 20 years and had mistaken it for winning. She never contacted Jack again. She had said what she needed to say in the letter, and she understood that the kindest thing she could do for the man she had wronged was to leave him in peace and to let her changed life, rather than her words be the whole of her apology. She did not know that he had kept the letter. She would never know. But she kept building the new life anyway, one unglamorous week at a time, not for him and not for the cameras that had long since moved on, but for a reason she could barely have articulated when it started and understood perfectly by the end, which was that a 7-year-old girl had once looked at the worst version of her and tried to be kind, and Victoria had decided to spend the rest of her life trying to become someone that child would not have needed to be brave to stand in front of. And Jack Carter went back to his life. That was the thing that the whole country in the end found hardest to understand and loved most about him. He could have been anything. He could have run for office, the operatives told him. He could have been a television commentator, the networks told him. He could have written a book, and every publisher in New York told him that. He could have taken the awards, the speaking fees, the endorsements, the fame, the money, all of it laid out at his feet, more than most men see in 10 lifetimes. And Jack Carter looked at all of it, and he said, "No thank you." And he went back to fixing air conditioners. He ran the foundation on nights and weekends, and he was proud of it, and it did real good in the world. But his days, his ordinary days, he spent the way he had always spent them, in a work shirt, with his name stitched on it, driving to buildings that were too hot or too cold, crawling into mechanical rooms, fixing what was broken with his own 2 hands, and then coming home to the only thing he had ever really wanted. Because Jack Carter had learned in the hardest school there is that a man is not what the world says about him. A man is what he does when no one is filming, and who he comes home to, and how he treats the person who has the least power in the room. He had held every kind of power a man can hold. He had held life and death in his hands in that valley. And he had learned that the only power worth having is the power to protect the people you love, and to refuse even when you could crush someone to become someone who crushes. A year to the day after the slap on an ordinary Saturday, Jack took Lily to the park. Not for any reason. It was just a nice day, and she had asked, and he had said yes, the way he tried to always say yes to the small things, because he had learned that the small things are not small, that the small things are in fact the entire substance of a life. They got hot chocolate from the little cart by the fountain, the way they had planned to a year before, and never gotten to. And they sat on a bench in the sun, and Lily, who was 8 now, and even more serious than she had been at 7, swung her legs and drank her cocoa, and was quiet for a while in that way that meant a big question was coming. "Daddy," she finally said, "can I ask you something about that day? The day the lady hit you?" Jack had wondered when this would come. He had known it would eventually when she was old enough to circle back to it and try to understand it. "Course you can, baby. You can ask me anything. Always." "Why didn't you hit her back?" And there it was. The question the whole country had asked in one form or another for a year. The question 10 million people had typed into comment sections. The question reporters had shouted, and admirals had answered, and generals had wept over. And now it was being asked finally by the only person whose asking of it had ever really mattered, by his own daughter on a park bench in the sun with hot chocolate on her breath and complete trust in her eyes. Jack set down his cup. He turned to face her, and he gave her the truest answer he had, the answer he had been living toward his whole life without quite knowing it, until a woman raised her hand in a marble room and gave him the chance to say it out loud. "Because I could have," he said. "That's the whole reason, baby. Because I could have hit her back and it would have been easy, and part of me even wanted to. She hurt me and she scared you, and there is a part of every person that wants to hurt back when they're hurt. That part is real and it's strong, and I'm not going to pretend I don't have it, because I do. Everybody does." He paused, making sure she was with him. "But here's the thing I learned a long time ago in some hard places before you were ever born. Anybody can hit back. It doesn't take anything. It doesn't take 1 ounce of strength to hit somebody who hit you first. The world is full of people hitting each other back, and it never once made the world better, not one single time in the whole history of the world." He looked out at the fountain and then back at his daughter. "The strong thing," he said, "the truly strong thing. The hardest thing there is to have every reason to hit back, and every right to hit back, and all the power you'd need to do it, and to choose not to choose to be gentle when you could be cruel, to choose to protect instead of destroy. That's not weakness, Lily. People think it's weakness. It's the opposite. It's the strongest thing a person can do, and it's strong precisely because it's so hard, because everything inside you and everything in the whole world is screaming at you to do the other thing." He reached over and put his hand on the side of her face. "And that day I had you. You were right there holding onto my leg, scared out of your mind, watching your daddy to see what he was going to do. And I knew right then that whatever I did in that moment was going to teach you something about the world and about what kind of man to look for and what kind of person to be. And I was not going to teach you that we answer cruelty with cruelty. Not you, not my girl. So I chose the harder thing. I chose you. I will always, every single time, in every room for the rest of my life, choose you." Lily was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at her hot chocolate, and then she looked back up at her father with eyes that were suddenly bright. "That's the best answer," she said. "That's the best answer anybody could ever give." And Jack Carter laughed and pulled his daughter in against his side and kissed the top of her head. And they sat there on the bench in the sun, the war hero and the little girl, the two of them, which had always been enough, which had always been everything, drinking their hot chocolate in the ordinary light of an ordinary day that a year of chaos had finally given back to them. The world had spent a year trying to make Jack Carter into a symbol, a hero, a legend, a hashtag. And he had refused all of it every time, and gone back to his work shirt and his daughter and his quiet life because he understood something that all the noise had missed. He was never trying to teach the world a lesson that day in the Meridian Club. He was only ever trying to teach one small person one lesson that she would carry for the rest of her life and pass on to her own children someday, long after everyone had forgotten the video and the trial and the names. And the lesson was this. And it was the whole of everything he believed, and he had proven it not with words, but with his own scarred body standing still under a stranger's blow, that people will judge you in an instant by your clothes and your money and your title, and they will almost always judge you wrong, because none of those things is what you are. What you are is revealed only in the one moment when you have every reason and every right and every power to be cruel, and you look down at the person you love most in the world, and you choose instead to be kind. That is the strength that outlasts every empire built on fear. That is the only power that was ever worth having. And a poor man in worn work boots holding his frightened daughter in a room full of the most powerful people in America had it in greater measure than all of them combined. Jack Carter knew it. His daughter would carry it. And that in the end was the only victory he had ever wanted.